Everyone, my name is Kelly Munn and I'm with the League of Education Voters. Welcome to our free online webinar series called Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series over 3 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. We are pleased to offer these LEVinars thanks to the generous support of our sponsors, the Boeing Company. Today's LEVinar covers the topic of early learning. LEV's mission is to improve public education and in particular to close achievement gaps. Over 10 years ago, LEV did the research and it became very clear to us that early learning helps to close gaps. Along with many others, we advocate for high quality early education for every child. Research repeatedly confirms that those students who attend a high quality early learning program perform far better than those who did not. They are more academically successful, able to persevere through adversity, and more likely to graduate from high school. Today, learn how early learning fits into the education continuum. Learn from Jennifer Jennings-Shaffer, the Early Learning Policy Director at the Children's Alliance, and Ryan Pricco, Director of Advocacy and Policy at Child Care Aware of Washington. I'm going to spend a moment to give you a brief background on both of our speakers today. Jennifer Jennings-Shaffer is the Early Learning Policy Director at the Children's Alliance. She leads the Children's Alliance Early Learning team and works with the Early Learning Action Alliance to advocate for policies and practices that ensure Washington's children, beginning with those furthest from opportunity, get access to the high-quality early learning opportunities that will set them up for success in school and life. Prior to joining the Children's Alliance in 2014, Jennifer worked at the Department of Early Learning for 6 years. Her work at Dell was in the Head Start Collaboration Office focused on building linkages across different sectors of the early learning system. And Jennifer is the proud parent of a 9-month-old baby boy. Ryan Pricco is the Child Care Aware Director of Advocacy and Policy. Ryan coordinates all advocacy efforts for Child Care Aware of Washington and is an effective voice, not ineffective, effective voice in Olympia for children, families, and caregivers during the state legislative session. When the legislature is not in session, Ryan focuses on grassroots mobilization, system messaging, and representing Child Care Aware at key meetings with state-level partners, staffing the Board of Trustee meetings, and assisting the Executive Director. Ryan's favorite memory working at Child Care Aware of Washington has been watching the Department of Early Learning and Thrive by 5 come together as a public-private partnership charged with moving early learning forward in Washington State. Ryan holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Washington. So before we begin, I'm just going to give a few reminders about how this works. You'll notice a chat function on the right side of your screen. This is a space for you to pose questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function or at info@educationvoters.org. With that, I'd like to welcome Jennifer and Ryan.
Thank you, Kelly. This is Jennifer, of course, and I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the background information. I'm going to share the legislative agenda for the Early Learning Action Alliance. And then I'm going to talk about specifically the work that we need to do in terms of expanding access to ECAP, our state pre-K program. And then I'm going to hand it off to Ryan to talk more about the work that we need to do to improve quality and access in childcare, and then a little bit of thinking about where we go from here. So if you could take to the next slide a little bit of background. And I confess now, I can't actually see this webinar because my internet connection went out on me approximately 30 seconds ago. So the slide that I believe that we're looking at is the one that says what happens in the 2,000 days before kindergarten matters, which kind of says it all. So when we talk about the education continuum, That means really, I think folks are very familiar with that term, but to harp on it for a second, that we know that children's learning starts, frankly, before they're born, but very definitely our obligation beginning the moment that they are born, and then it continues through their education experiences in the K-12 system, and then, of course, the experiences that they go through in post-secondary that lead them to opportunities in career and in life. Fundamentally, children simply do not wait to begin to learn until we designate them ready for kindergarten at age 5. What we know is, in fact, that an immense amount of their development happens prior to that moment. 85% of brain development actually occurs by age 5, and yet what we invest a fraction of the money that we spend on total towards education during this period, when in fact this is when the neural connections and approach to learning, the way children experience learning and regard themselves as learners, that entire foundation is being laid during this period. So it's absolutely critical for everything that comes after. It's critical for maximizing the investments that we're putting into K-12 now. The returns in terms of less need for special education, generally the fact that some children actually never catch up. We see it later in social costs like crime prevention, future career opportunities. Really, the list is frankly endless. But unfortunately, what we see is that children do not arrive at that kindergarten doorstep coming from the same place. Disparate access to opportunities during those first 5 years have a profound impact on how children enter that space. And what we see is, according to WAKID, which is our kindergarten entry assessment system, which is using a whole child assessment called Teaching Strategies Goals, which looks at children across areas of development, cognitive, social, emotional, physical, 6 areas in total. And according to that, only 47% of incoming kindergartners demonstrate age-level expectations across all 6 areas. And what becomes really alarming is that when you break that 47% down, and when you look at it disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and income, what you see is that the disparities become very, very stark. And so it's extremely clear that if we wait to support kids, we have missed a huge opportunity. On the next slide, you'll see the Early Learning Action Alliance legislative agenda for the 2017 session. And I apologize, it's a little bit wordy. It was not designed to be a PowerPoint slide. But what you see is the goal of the Early Learning Action Alliance, that every child have the opportunities they need to succeed in school and in life, regardless of their race, ethnicity, geography, ability, or family economics. The Early Learning Action Alliance, I should mention, is a statewide coalition of over 60 organizations who come together to advocate jointly for access to high-quality early learning opportunities. And this is grounded in the knowledge, and I believe Kelly referenced this, that we know that high-quality early learning is an intervention that works, that makes a difference. And so when we looked at what do we need to do to move the needle in 2017, these are the items we identified. Broadly speaking, we need to expand access to high-quality pre-kindergarten, which means ECAP in our state. Invest in the value that quality delivers in working connections childcare, which is the piece you'll hear more about from Ryan. We need to grow and retain a highly competent early learning professional workforce, which comes frankly down to issues of compensation. And we need to support parents as their child's first teacher by sustaining and expanding home visiting and enacting paid family and medical leave. And of course, to do all of this, we recognize the need for new revenue. We are not going to go into the details of all of these components today. We're going to really zero in on ECAP and childcare, which are frankly 2 of the really big ticket items in the Early Learning Action Alliance's agenda for this year. On the next slide, you'll see some information about ECAP. So one of the great things about ECAP is that it has a proven track record of success. ECAP serves 3- and 4-year-olds in families making under 110% of the federal poverty level, as well as those demonstrating risk factors such as homelessness, involvement in child welfare, or disabilities. And it really does move the needle for these kids. We have evidence of the immense progress that they make while they are in the program in the course of fall to spring. as well as really long-term benefits. We see that these gains do in fact hold over time. We see increased math and reading scores up through 5th grade, and that's only how far we've looked yet. There will be future follow-ups, and we of course hope to see evidence of those gains much beyond that. And a recent study by the Washington State Institute for Public Policy estimates that we actually see a return of $4.75 for every $1 that we invest in ECAP. And this is important. This is not often when we talk about return on investment, perhaps we reference different national studies on other programs. This is specific to ECAP. We really do have the evidence that this program in our state works. And it's nationally recognized for its quality. There's an organization called MIR that looks at quality benchmarks within state pre-Ks across the nation, and it meets 9 out of 10 quality benchmarks. And I should note that the one that it doesn't meet is serving enough kids. So we have a great base to build on with this program. On the next slide, you can see some information about, frankly, where we need to go and what we need to do. We need to invest in the opportunity that ECAP gives us. We need to serve more kids. Approximately now the program is serving a little under 12,000 children a year, which is a fraction of those who could benefit. The legislature has committed to providing ECAP for all eligible children who want it by 2020. And so in order to reach that goal, we need to serve approximately 7,400 additional children over the next 4 years. So we see this session as a time when we should be making substantial progress towards that goal. The governor's budget included a proposal to add 2,700 new slots for children, which we support. We also need to fund the cost of quality. Currently, the rates paid for ECAP are very low, and this compromises the ability of programs to recruit and retain the qualified staff that are really at the heart of a high-quality experience for children. So we are asking for an increase to that rate of 12%. And we need to invest in facilities. Frankly, we just need somewhere for these kids to go. You can only find so many church basements, and so we need money for loans and grants for providers to build new facilities or to renovate existing facilities so that they can be up to the standard to serve children. What I'll say is I made this PowerPoint yesterday before the Senate budget was released, and that initial budget proposal, which is of course the opening volley in the negotiation process that will be happening over the coming months, falls really, really short on these things. It adds no slots for new children in the coming biennium, and it compromises our long-term progress towards serving all eligible children by actually cutting 3-year-olds out of eligibility. So it is essentially a $54 million cut to the program. It makes a very small investment in increasing the rate paid per slot, and of course the capital budget is yet unknown. But just to flag that where we are now is not where we need to be in making progress towards serving more children with ECAP. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to talk more about childcare.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. My name is Ryan Pricco. I direct policy and advocacy services for Child Care Aware of Washington. And just some quick background on that organization. We have 6 regional programs that serve every community in the state, and we deliver all of the quality improvement services within early achievers to licensed child care providers. And we also operate a call center that helps over 20,000 families each year find child care throughout the state. So we work a lot in licensed child care. We believe that licensed child care is one of, if not the state's primary early learning programs, and our mission is to ensure that we maximize the potential of every child that is in licensed child care. And I'll go ahead and kind of talk about what we're doing and what more we need to do in order to accomplish that. So again, looking at the slide, The first bullet here talks about how early achievers is really geared towards outcomes for kids, which is a fundamental shift in childcare from what the state previously did. Before the Early Start Act, everything around licensed childcare was geared towards just having a safe place for kids to go while families worked. And now we're making the transition to ensuring that while those kids are there during this incredibly important development window, that they actually receive high quality care and maximize their brain development. So Early Achievers is driven by the University of Washington's research and the research that they gather from other institutions, combined with feedback from Early Achievers participants, child care aware staff, and other oversight constituencies regarding what it takes to run a successful community-based program. And that really drives where the policies and resources in Early Achievers are at year to year. We really made it as a flexible system so that we can respond to changing demographics and updated research that shows where we get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of school readiness for kids coming out of licensed child care programs. As you see here, 70% of licensed child care providers have joined Early Achievers last August due to the Early Start Act passage in 2015. A requirement kicked in on August 1st that said anyone who is receiving public dollars in order to provide care for children on subsidies, so children who will come from low-income working families, would be required to participate in Early Achievers. So that really kicked up the participation level. However, before even August came around, more than half of the workforce had joined the program voluntarily. So there was a lot of excitement around this program because, again, for years, child care got used to being neglected, and now all of a sudden with the Early Start Act came a ton of research, a ton of resources, and some guidance for how providers can maximize, what they're very passionate about, which is doing what's best for kids. Believe me, you don't get into this field unless you have that passion. And requirements are going to ramp up moving forward. So right now, you're just required to participate. But the Early Start Act requires all programs receiving public funds to rate at a level 3 by 2020. And I'll say that level 3, even though it doesn't sound like it, level 3 is a pretty high level of quality, particularly when you consider that child care workers are some of the lowest paid workers in our entire economy. I think they're in the 3rd percentile for all occupations in the state of Washington. Nearly 40% of everyone that works in child care is on state assistance themselves, and child care teachers in classrooms, in center classrooms, turn over at 45% every year. And so we need Early Start Act resources and then some in order to meet these pretty ambitious goals that we've set out for our programs and ultimately for how our kids perform at the next level. Going to the next slide, we get into what we need right now at this point in time, and again, in order to move this field forward. And probably the most important thing is that we increase working connection child care reimbursement rates for child care center programs. Our family child care programs have mobilized under SEIU. They have a collective bargaining relationship with the state, and they've been able to move their rates forward pretty well over the last few years, although I would argue that their rates are not adequate as well. But they are ahead of center rates. And when we talk to child care centers, their rates are as low as 30% of private rates. The rates vary by region, but I think that there's very few communities out there where reimbursement rates are above 60% of private rates. So programs, again, already making poverty wages have to commit to taking on a financial hit from the state if they decide to serve our most vulnerable kids that are in licensed child care programs. This has made the new minimum wage initiative incredibly difficult to implement, particularly for programs that serve children on subsidy. We've done some research with programs asking them what their state is in implementing this new initiative, and more than half of all programs report having to raise wages for more than half of their staff. Again, our wages across the board are so low that a great percentage of our workers are already making minimum wage, and now all those wages have to come up, which is great, except that there's no money for these programs in order to do that. So over 70% of our programs report that they will have to raise rates on private paying families in order to implement the initiative. And as anyone in the state who's currently paying for child care, like Jennifer and I are, we can tell you that that's very difficult. We're the 3rd most expensive state for infants in family childcare, in the nation, I mean, for infants in family childcare. And currently, young families are paying more out of pocket annually for tuition at childcare than they're paying for your average tuition at a state university. So to think that we can implement that initiative with just parents paying more is pretty foolish in my opinion. You also see here that we're asking for a technical work group that would develop recommendations for how to deal with all of this, not just implementing this initiative, but also just the scourge of low wages across the board, and us asking, you know, adults who are in poverty themselves to provide arguably the most important part of the education continuum to a kid during this incredibly important window. So we need to develop a long-term plan, and we're asking the state to bring together stakeholders and experts in order to get that started. On the next slide, you'll see kind of what our strategies are going forward and what we're trying to tell lawmakers right now. You'll see that we argue strenuously that you will not reach the outcomes that we want for our kids by just meeting the McCleary mandate or you know, just trying to put all of our money into K-12. Of course, we're very supportive of K-12. Our ultimate goal is to see kids succeed in K-12, but the bottom line is that 95% of a person's brain develops before they reach K-12, and we need to be very mindful of how that brain develops. We need to invest in all stages of a child's education, from birth to career placement. We believe that high-quality early learning prepares children socially and emotionally to be a lifelong learner. High-quality K-12 provides the basic knowledge that all citizens need, and high-quality higher ed prepares students to enter the workforce. And without all those components being funded adequately and being coordinated and working seamlessly together, you know, we're never going to reduce these gaps that we see and get the outcomes that we want. That's why we say that any budget proposal that claims to fund education but shortchanges early learning is penny-wise and pound-foolish. That's particularly true for our most vulnerable children, who are experiencing trauma and neglect while almost all of their brain develops. This severely limits brain development, creating a very costly and difficult remediation effort for the K-12 system. I think everyone on this phone is well aware of the amount of money we spend on special education and remediation and how difficult it is to get kids caught up with their peers once they're behind in K-12. Well, the way that we prevent that from ever happening is by investing in high-quality early learning first. So that kind of concludes my general comments, and I know that Jennifer and I are happy to answer anybody's questions.
Thank you, Ryan and Jennifer. The first question is going to be an easy one, and that is, can you explain at a really high level, Jennifer, what ECAP is?
Yes, that leads me to believe I should have done that. So ECAP is our state pre-K program, and it's a comprehensive program. So as I said before, it serves 3- and 4-year-olds from low-income families, and so they get a holistic experience. They get a high-quality preschool experience in the classroom, and those are delivered in various settings, including school district settings, as well as private nonprofit settings and communities. And in addition, there's a family support component. So these programs work with families to set family goals that are really customized to what that family needs, be it furthering the parent's education, access to supporting the parent to find access to housing, just whatever it is, recognizing that children exist in the context of their families. And it's also about supporting parent leadership to be involved in their child's education throughout their child's life, and to be an advocate for their kid going forward. Within the experience, the preschool experience, there's also emphasis on ensuring that children have access to general and oral health care, because we know that children who are sick or who are experiencing dental pain are not able to learn, and access to nutrition, so information for parents for outside of the classroom, and then healthy meals while the child is in the program.
Thank you. So folks who are listening, we have 5 to 10 more minutes for questions. Just a reminder that you can type your questions into the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen, and just a reminder that absolutely no question is too basic. This comes from one of our listeners. How does the 47%, so this is for Jennifer, who are meeting standard relate to family income?
So first off, I'm going to say I hesitate to use the phrase meeting standard, and so just a little bit about you know, what WA Kids is. And so it's a subtle difference, but in this age group, it's an important one. It's demonstrating characteristics expected for the age group. So it's, you know, it's not a standard that they do or do not meet necessarily. I want to say that fundamentally, in our state, you know, children are ready for kindergarten when they're 5. I mean, we talk about kindergarten readiness much more broadly, ready to be successful there, but it's, you know, a good assessment tells us where a kid is so that we can pick them up and best support them going forward. That being said, how it relates to income, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me at this moment because, of course, my internet has gone down. But the correlation is exactly what you would expect it to be, which is that children in families who are lower income aren't demonstrating the same level of readiness as their peers from more affluent families. It's a very notable difference in the data.
Thank you. And so this question is probably for each of you, because you're covering different aspects of early learning. But how will President Trump's proposed budget cuts affect early learning in Washington State?
You want to take a run at that, Ryan?
Sure, I can jump on definitely the child care aspect of that. You know, child care, the primary funding source for child care comes from the federal government, at least, you know, families receiving assistance in order to get care. And that comes from the Child Care Development Block Grant. And much like how our state is transitioning our state child care program, Working Connections Child Care, from a work support to an early learning program, the feds are kind of doing the same thing. And they took a big first step towards that a couple years ago by reauthorizing CCDBG. With a bigger focus on quality care. The problem is that after they passed that bill, they didn't come through with the funds to pay for all these enhancements that are getting passed down to the states. And that money was supposed to come in the form of the budget this year, and the President's budget does not reflect the resources that we need in order to implement all of those quality improvements and ensure that families maintain access through them. Beyond that, I'll say that he targeted a couple community development programs for elimination that play a very big role in providing before and after school child care for kids who are in the K-12 system. And that's actually received a lot of media attention, and when the administration has been asked about it, they said flatly that they just don't believe that those programs are delivering the return on investment that they promised that they would. And so their proposal is just to take those programs away from those kids, and it's unclear right now where exactly those children would go before and after school if those funding resources are taken away.
Thank you, Ryan. Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is that it's a little less clear on the preschool front. The budget does call for an overall cut of 18% to Health and Human Services, which Head Start is situated within, but it doesn't specifically tell us how those cuts would be made. But it certainly is not a good sign. And you know, I think that just at a more global level, what I would point to is that you know, cuts to the large variety of programs that are federally funded in our state just puts that much more pressure, right, on our state budget overall. And, you know, that pressure is something that impacts early learning as well as many other areas.
Thank you. I'm going to follow, this is a great follow-up question to Ryan. You said that Washington is the 3rd most expensive in the nation. Do the 1st and 2nd most expensive states also have a robust QRIS system in place? Is high cost correlated with high quality?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't have the rankings in front of me. I would say that it's my understanding that no state has as robust of a QRIS system as Washington does, meaning we have high standards, we have high expectations, but we also put a ton of money into supporting programs who are participating. We provide all of our trainings for free. We give participants scholarships. We give them quality improvement awards to incentivize them moving up in the levels. We give them needs-based grants, substitutes that are paid for, et cetera. There's a lot of states whose QRIS systems basically just consist of standards and then relying on the market to drive programs to those standards. And as I explained before, childcare is kind of a broken market, so it doesn't really work that way. So I don't think that there's a direct correlation between a QRIS system and the high cost of care. I think that there's a stronger correlation between cost of living and cost of care. I think that's one thing generally that's come through the annual rankings from our national association. And I think that's a bigger driver. But there's a myriad of things that result in high cost of care. And certainly regulation does increase the cost of care, but our stance has always been that that's a worthwhile investment because, again, we're talking about such an important development window for our kids. And childcare is the early learning program for 130,000 kids throughout Washington State.
And Ryan, I probably should have tagged this into the question, but can you give a really short, big picture view of what QRIS is?
Sure. So QRIS is the fundamental thing that it does is it defines what quality childcare looks like. And again, we built our standards off an abundance of research that University of Washington is a worldwide leader in, but we also pulled a lot of information from Harvard and North Carolina and other places that have done phenomenal research as well. There are probably about 30 states that went forward with a QRIS system. We drew from all of their lessons learned as well. And what our system is built on is we articulate what's going to get kids up to school readiness, a critical percentage of kids up to school readiness related to our WAKID system. And then we align our standards and our resources with that goal. And so someone joins Early Achievers, we send our coaches and our trainers out to those programs to support them, to help them develop their own plan for improving the quality. We ask them what kind of program they envision being long-term because we want to maintain the unique diversity of programs that are offered to our families. And then they start working on implementing all these quality improvements. And again, we bring resources like free scholarships, need-based grants, materials, et cetera, so that they actually have the resources to accomplish those quality improvements. When they feel they're ready for a rating, they submit for one, and the University of Washington comes out and conducts that rating. They do a ton of data collection. They go back to their shop, they crunch the numbers, and that program is assigned a 1 through 5 rating. And again, kind of the benchmark that we've identified for our programs receiving taxpayer dollars is we want a level 3 level of care or higher by 2020. And then once programs receive a rating, they receive additional coaching and support from Child Care Aware so that they can continue to move forward on improving the quality, again, in alignment with the vision that they have for their own program. And a few years later, they can get rated again.
Thank you. So Jennifer, I'm going to ask you this one, and Ryan, you jump in after if you have an answer too. How do you plan to get the parents of at-risk children to recognize their role and to actively participate in their early education?
Well, I guess one thing is that I wouldn't, how would I put it? I wouldn't operate under the assumption that that these families are not currently engaged in their child's education. But what I will say is, one thing I'll point to in the context of ECAP, because I can't resist the chance to talk about it, is the work that the Washington State Association for Head Start and ECAP does with parents through the Parent Ambassadors Program. And these are parents who join a cohort and receive this really wonderful in-depth training in advocacy, and they are forced to be reckoned with in Olympia. In the context of, and beyond, in the context of individual programs, one of the great things that ECAP as well as Head Start programs do is they have policy councils, which parents join and have an opportunity to be engaged in the design and implementation of the program. And that's a great way for parents to really learn about the experience that their children are having in the classroom, and learn about how the program operates, and learn about, frankly, their right to be involved in that. You know, and I guess more broadly, I would say that you know, I think that we have an education system at large, you know, a K-12 system, and I think most folks would agree with this, that is not incredibly friendly to parent engagement in terms of engaging parents, particularly those who may have had negative education experiences themselves, those who may face language barriers. And so I think sometimes what these parents need is a little extra support to recognize that they have a you know, a right to advocate for their children in that space and to be engaged, and that education isn't something that happens somewhere else by someone else. So that's, you know, one version of that support. And I don't know if that gets to your question, so I'll pause and ask.
Jennifer, I think, yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I would just add that that in childcare, particularly through early achievers, and this reminds me that I might have left the whole most important part of early achievers out of my little description of it, is that we build family engagement into the standards. And so we actually assess programs on how well they engage families with information about their individual child, about the importance of early learning, how well they bring them into the program and help them network with other families in the program. You can receive credit on your score for doing things like that. And that leads me to what I was just saying, that ultimately the goal of early achievers is to get this rating information and then pass it on to families who are looking for care through our family center. So when people call us looking for care, we can tell them you got a level 4 program by your house, you've got a level 3 program by your work, and we can even dive into the ratings and say this program really exceeds at cognitive development, or this program scored really well on family engagement. So we can give that level of information to families, and while doing that, we can have a conversation with them, and our counselors are trained to do so, about how important all of that stuff is during, again, this development window. But more than anything, I think that what you see happening both with new leadership at the Department of Early Learning and with this proposal to consolidate Children's Administration from DSHS with the Department of Early Learning under a new Department of Children, Youth, and Families, is trying to connect all these different support structures in place for kids and families wherever they are with one another, so we maximize those investments. So you're seeing childcare and preschool getting brought together with kids in the child welfare system and who are on CPS, the kids who could utilize those services the most. And you see Director Hunter, the new director at the Department of Early Learning, working more closely with the Department of Health around their efforts with child profile and other developmental tools that are given to parents once they have children. I think bringing all of these together and bringing more focus to those first 5 years is incredibly important, because before we started doing this work, we were leaving these young families to just, deal with this development window all by themselves. And as we all know, when you're having kids for the first time, you're typically at best like just establishing your career, and more often than not, you're trying to get into your career, you're in school, or you're struggling even more than that. And so just leaving families kind of on their own to be able to maximize that brain development with the little resources they have and the little information they have just wasn't working. And so now we're trying to bring all these support structures more closely together to make sure that families have an abundance of information and support in order to get their kids ready for success in school and life.
This is going to be my last question to you. Ryan, what are you working on to raise wages significantly in early childhood programs?
Well, we're working a lot with our licensed programs around the state, encouraging them to just share their story with their legislators. I mean, these are all small businesses that are shutting down at an alarming rate, who are getting pushed out the door by this minimum wage initiative, and who, again, receive half, if not less, reimbursement for the care that they're providing for our kids, our state's most vulnerable children. So it's been pretty effective so far for them to, not, we haven't done a lot of messaging control with these programs because we want them all to share their unique stories about what it's like to operate their program in that district, in that community, with the unique families that they serve. And that story is different from region to region, and I think that we've been able to paint a pretty good picture across the state that the only consistent thing amongst it is that all of these programs don't have the resources they need in order to pull out the outcomes that the state is expecting of them. And even in the Senate budget today, which I'll agree is pretty terrifying and includes a devastating cut to early achievers, you do see a very small, I think 1% increase to working connections rates even in that budget. So there is some recognition that the rates do need to come up, but at the same time they're partially paying for it by cutting off access. So new families who, a single mom who just got a job and now has a couple days to find childcare, who needs help paying for her $1,500 to $2,000 a month childcare bill, is now going to be told that she's on a wait list to get that assistance if this budget were implemented. So there's a lot of bad here, but I think we are making some progress on the rates, and we're primarily doing that by just asking programs and the families they serve to share their story.
Thank you. Jennifer, I'm just going to do a quick follow-up with you. Are there efforts to raise wages for ECAP providers as well?
It's absolutely essential. So one of the things that we know is that, ECAP teachers, they're currently required to have an AA degree, and many of them have BA degrees, but they make, approximately, I think it's maybe $32,000 a year is an average for a teacher with a BA degree, so much less than a teacher teaching children in the K-3 range, in spite of a similar qualification. So that being said, that's one of the reasons that the push to increase the rate we pay per ECAP slot is so important, because when we've seen surveys of ECAP providers about what they would use that rate increase for, a majority of them have said they would use it to increase compensation for staff. That's one of the big struggles for programs. So that's a way that we could do that.
Thank you, Jennifer. So thank you, Ryan and Jennifer, for giving us your time and information. Our next LEVinar will be an update on the legislative session. It'll be at 12:30 on Thursday, April 27th. And our speakers will be our government affairs folks from both League of Education Voters and some other organizations. Thanks to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to Kelly, K-E-L-L-Y, @educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website. Please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. And thank you again for attending. We hope you'll join us again.